Good evening and welcome to a special Friday edition of The Last Word, focusing on defendant Trump. Donald Trump has not come up with a magical solution to prevent New York's Attorney General Letitia James from beginning the process of attaching his assets on Monday in order to guarantee the payment of a $464 million civil fraud judgment against Donald Trump. The merger announced today between Donald Trump's social media company with a much higher valued company called the Digital World Acquisition Corporation can do nothing to change Donald Trump's financial capacities on Monday, when Donald Trump hits the deadline for satisfying the judgment against him. If Donald Trump had $464 million, he could just post it with the court as a guarantee that he could cover the judgment if he loses his appeal of the case. But Donald Trump doesn't have that much money, despite claiming to have had much more than that for many, many years now. And Donald Trump has not been able to get anyone to lend him that money so that he could post a bond with the court for the judgment, which would then protect his assets. The court gave Donald Trump 30 days to figure this out, and he hasn't been able to. And so now, as financial reality closes in on him, Donald Trump goes to bed lying and wakes up lying. Last night at 1:54 a.m., he posted one of his familiar lies on social media, saying that the judgment against him was unconstitutional and unfair, and that it was designed by the judge to, quote, not allow me to use any of the large amount of cash I have built up over the years through hard work, insight, instinct, and diligence on my political campaign for president. So the lie there is that Donald Trump does not have hundreds of millions of dollars, just doesn't have it, and the lie that he was going to spend that money on his political campaign. That is a complete and total lie. Donald Trump has never spent one penny of his own money on any of his political campaigns. In his first campaign for president, after promising that he would finance his entire campaign himself and would never ask anyone to donate to his campaign, Donald Trump loaned a total of $10.8 million to his campaign to get it started, and then he quickly began begging for money every day of his life online to his supporters. And when his supporters sent in enough money, Donald Trump paid himself back the $10 million that he loaned to his campaign. So no, Donald Trump was not hoarding large amounts of cash, hundreds of millions of dollars, so that he could spend that money on his political campaign, as he said just before 2 a.m. last night. And then, when he woke up this morning, if he slept at all, at 7:14 a.m., Donald Trump repeated that lie, saying, I currently have almost $500 million in cash, a substantial amount of which I intended to use in my campaign for president. No, he did not. He has never intended to use one penny of his own money in his campaign. And saying that he now has almost $500 million in cash would mean that his lawyers were lying when they told the judge at the beginning of the week that it was, quote, an impossibility. That was their word, an impossibility for Donald Trump to come up with $500 million in cash. Trump's lawyers actually called that, quote, a practical impossibility. The Trump lawyers explained to the court just how thoroughly Donald Trump failed in coming up with the money. The lawyers said, quote, these diligent efforts have included approaching about 30 surety companies through 4 separate brokers. A bond requirement of this enormous magnitude, effectively requiring cash reserves approaching $1 billion, is unprecedented for a private company. So, in a Manhattan courtroom on Monday, the foundational lie of Donald Trump's image building as a politician will be exposed.
I don't need anybody's money. It's nice. I don't need anybody's money. I'm using my own money. I'm not using the lobbyists. I'm not using donors. I don't care. I'm really rich.
That was an enormous part of Donald Trump's initial appeal when he began as a candidate. He mounted other appeals, including direct appeals to racists, to expand his base of support. But many Trump voters in Iowa believed then and said then in interviews that the Trump wealth that they believed he had was a virtue. They believed he would be incorruptible because he had too much money already to be corrupted. Donald Trump was lying about that. And his voters were wrong to believe it. But they have forgiven or overlooked every Trump lie that has been exposed. And so at the end of the day on Monday, most of them might still be willing to believe that Donald Trump is as rich as he has always pretended to be. But Donald Trump knows better. And Donald Trump has proved how rich he isn't to anyone who can think. The world's famous billionaires have no problem coming up with $500 million. Jeff Bezos has that in his pocket. Bill Gates has given away more money than Donald Trump has ever had in his life. Bill Gates has given away billions of dollars. And the real billionaire New York politician, former mayor of New York, Mike Bloomberg, who has also given away billions of dollars, never brags about his wealth. He could easily cover a sudden bill of $500 million at any time from his current holdings of $106.2 billion. Mike Bloomberg started with nothing, grew up in suburban Boston, moved to New York City, had to work to make every single penny he has earned, had to do it on his own. Donald Trump hates billionaires like Mike Bloomberg, who came to the big city where Donald Trump was born rich and left Donald Trump far behind in the building of important businesses and the accumulation of wealth that staggers Donald Trump's poisoned imagination. Donald Trump has never dared to even pretend that he is as rich as Mike Bloomberg. Never mind the younger men like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, who have hit the stratospheric level of wealth that Donald Trump seethes with jealousy about every day of his life. The drama Donald Trump is living through now, the drama he's living through tonight, the drama that we are all watching, was foretold when the presidential election was called for Joe Biden and Donald Trump officially entered the history books as a loser. On that day, Peter Marks, the drama critic of the Washington Post, wrote, "I imagine it as a chilling final turn of the plot. His world is coming to an end. He will never have another good day. Loser label will haunt him. The law will pursue him. Mental illness will hobble him. His properties will bankrupt him." The cases involving the January 6th attack on the Capitol, all of those civil suits for which you have won, these might be the cases that do finally bankrupt Donald Trump.
There's so many victims in these cases, and Lawrence, as you mentioned, we have not, set out a dollar amount. We're principally seeking accountability, and ultimately it's up to a jury as to, what that dollar amount is if Donald Trump is found guilty for inciting and aiming the mob. But the plaintiff class is so large, and as you said, when you compare it to the Giuliani verdict, the exposure is certainly pretty great. And what I hope people at home take comfort in is that for years there's been this frustration that Donald Trump has escaped responsibility and accountability. And finally, even as slow as these cases are moving, and they're moving too slow, accountability is coming for Donald Trump. And perhaps, that's how we can redeem the rule of law in our country.
Yeah, we're going to see some accountability on Monday, and that's why the judicial system has two components, civil and criminal. Sometimes criminal moves faster than civil. Sometimes civil moves faster than criminal. Here we've seen this case brought by the Attorney General was actually years in the making, but this year it seemed to move quite quickly compared to what people were seeing on the criminal side.
And Lawrence, frankly, our criminal and civil justice system was not built for a legal terrorist like Donald Trump. He is a professional litigant. I mean, there may not be another person in America who has had their name attached to more lawsuits than Donald Trump. And through 40 years of experience in the legal system, he's learned how to grind it down and to delay, and obstruct. And he's been somewhat successful. And frankly, we have to look beyond Trump as to what do we do when someone like Trump comes along in the future. Adam Schiff, I think, has the best proposal here. He has a bill called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which creates kind of a fast track when you have cases involving an executive or a former executive, so that someone isn't able to grind it out like this and then perhaps win an election and then make their liability go completely away.
So the first thing that Donald Trump is already in the process of bankrupting is his own presidential campaign, the Biden-Harris campaign raising much more money than the Trump campaign. Biden-Harris campaign spending it all on campaigning. The Trump campaign spending it on Donald Trump's lawyers.
Yeah, and Lawrence, again, these folks, so many of them through small contributions, put their faith in a man who's promised that he's going to make their lives better. And all he's done is made his own life, better. And when Donald Trump looks at the word America, it has 7 letters in it, and he only sees one, the letter I. And that's why we have to make it clear this election in November for Donald Trump is entirely about escaping accountability. And is to the degree that Joe Biden can show that for him, the election is about seeing everybody and governing for everybody, I think he can win on that. And that's going to become even more pronounced as more and more cases come, for Donald Trump and we get closer to November.
Professor Shaviro, there are 2 governing entities that have an interest in this. One of them is a weak entity, the Federal Elections Commission, which has basically abdicated enforcement because it's stuck in a standoff between the Democratic members of it and the Republican members. So they don't really enforce anything anymore. But what does the Federal Election Commission say in their rules that they don't enforce about this money, about using campaign money to pay lawyers?
Well, that's not, I'm more knowledgeable about the tax than about that, but I've researched that a little bit, and they have the so-called irrespective rule. So it has to be litigation that would be occurring irrespective of whether the person was running for office. Now, I think there's just no doubt, well, I hate to opine on federal election law, but there's no doubt that they're paying for the Trump legal case about the insurrectionists and the 14th Amendment, that was legit. But something else, like, for example, the Jean Harris trial, it's just totally different.
The E. Jean Carroll trial. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jean Carroll trial. Yeah. And that is highly likely, from what I know about election law, to be illegal. On the other hand, as you point out, it's not going to be interpreted. So maybe the tax law, though we're not sure that's going to be enforced either here, that might be a more salient way to look at it.
Yeah, so on the tax question, the IRS and tax law, they don't care what the FEC says or anyone else says about what income is and what it isn't. They have their own definitions of income. How does the IRS see this?
Well, I think the actual IRS is probably lying low on this. But if you ask how should the IRS see it from the point of view of enforcement, it's really not one question. It's a bunch of questions. And the reason is that there are a bunch of different expenditures. Again, there's really no chance that he has taxable income, I think, on having the Republican National Committee pay for his defending his right to be on the ballot without regard to the merits of that claim of the Supreme Court decision. On the other hand, when he has a personal lawsuit because he sexually assaulted and then defamed someone, that's a little bit different. So I think the tax question, kind of, when they give him money, if they give him money to pay for something that's deductible, it really doesn't matter because the income is offset by the deduction. On the other hand, if they gave him money to pay for his groceries, that would be income and no deduction. So we have to look at the different criminal and civil trials and kind of see where they are. And it seems to me to be pretty clear that when you're defending yourself against defamation and based on sexual assault, the tax standard for deducting legal fees that you pay is called the origin of the claim rule. So there was a corporate executive who had a divorce, and his wife wanted to take half of the stock in the divorce, and he said he would then lose control of the company, be fired as CEO, and he therefore needed to deduct fighting her in the divorce. And the Supreme Court said, we don't care if that's true or not. It's the origin of the claim. This claim, the legal fees, came from your defending a divorce, and that's a personal matter. So I think that just clearly applies to the civil suit in New York, where he just faced $88 million of liability. Now, on the other hand, the thing that you've been talking about and that everyone's been thinking about the suit on Monday, that is his paying for that is probably deductible in respect to his business. I mean, to give it an analogy, if Tony Soprano is indicted under the federal racketeering laws, I think Tony Soprano can probably deduct paying his legal fees. So again, here, having someone else pay them and not including it because you can deduct what it was done for makes it a wash. Now, some of the other cases are in different settings. For example, you were talking about the Washington civil trials that are yet to come. And of course, we know all about the other criminal trials. And on those, I think he has a pretty good case for deducting it. But on the other hand, it's not ironclad. There are actually counter arguments against saying that he has to include it, which would probably take 5 or 10 minutes more to explain. But on the New York civil defamation, I just don't see any chance it's not taxable income.
Tim O'Brien, taxable income is not the first thing Donald Trump thinks about when people give him money.
No, and you know, he's bleeding small donor contributions. Mm-hmm. And that's been the lifeblood of his campaign fundraising. And it may be that all of these shenanigans are starting to register with all the little people who've been giving Donald Trump money in the idea that he's actually carrying their values and their needs into the world instead of just lining his own wallet and paying off his lawyers with that money. And I have to wonder, in the midst of all this, where is the FEC?
Well, they gave up enforcement years ago. It's this horrible political jam that they're in because they're supposed to have an equal number of Democrats appointed, an equal number of Republicans appointed. In the past, they all had the same attitude toward running clean campaigns and making sure that laws were observed. The Republicans have blocked every single enforcement they've tried to do there at the FEC.
But couldn't someone bring a complaint to them nonetheless that the FEC would be compelled to take a look at?
They have, people do file complaints, and the Republicans blocked the procedure within the FEC, which they control. Either side can control that procedure. We could go on and on.
Another blow for good government.
About the FEC, and Donald Trump's been lucky to be there during that era. Professor Shaviro and Tim O'Brien, thank you both very much for joining this discussion.